Whoopi Goldberg has stepped in it. And let me just start with this. Of course, they're like, she should be fired. The internal ABC nasty staffers. Whoopi, been there. So she should not be fired. She stepped in it, right? She's in a controversy, but I hate the, fire. Here's what happened. She went on The View yesterday and made comments about the Holocaust that were really boneheaded. I mean, crazy ass boneheaded. And this is how the controversy got started. Listen to what she said yesterday.
If you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No. It's not about race.
No, it's about a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about.
But it's about white supremacy. It's about
but
going
it's
after
not, it's
Jews
not about
and race.
But these are two white groups of people.
Well, they don't have to black people
see them as white.
But you're missing the point. You're missing the point. The minute you turn it into race, it goes down this alley. Let's talk about it for what it is. It's how people treat each other. It's a problem. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, because black, white, Jews, everybody eats each other.
Okay. So before we get to the attempt at cleanup, let me start with you on this, Eliana. What was wrong with what she said?
Where do we begin? I'm with you, Megyn. She should not be fired. Everybody has an unfortunate statement. We can fault her for ignorance. Okay. This is what happens when you live in a color of your skin, race essentialist world. The Holocaust, of course, Jews were not considered a part of the Aryan race, even though their skin color matched that of their Aryan German counterparts. Hitler had different theories about what made one pure-blooded. In the race essentialist view of our liberal contemporaries, Jews are white privileged people, and that is obviously the view that Whoopi Goldberg has embraced. And it was interesting in her apology, she cited the Anti-Defamation League, and they too talk about Jews of color and white Jews. So that's the problem with what she said yesterday, and why there was so much blowback on it.
Perfectly said. Okay, so now let's get to her attempted cleanup. First, she issues a written statement, apologizing yesterday. It was a tweet that basically where she said, I stepped in it and I'm sorry. Then she made the mistake of going on with Stephen Colbert and talking about it live. And it's very clear she does better when somebody is controlling her written apology than she does when she actually is going back to how she really feels. And here she was last night on Colbert.
I feel being black, when we talk about race, it's a very different thing to me. As a black person, I think of race as being something that I can see. When you talk about being a racist, I was saying you can't call this racism. This was evil. Mm-hmm. This wasn't based on the skin. You couldn't tell who was Jewish. Mm-hmm. They had to delve deeply to figure it out. See, if the Klan is coming down the street and I'm standing with a Jewish friend and neither one, I'm going to run. But if my friend decides not to run, they'll get passed by most times because you can't tell who's Jewish.
She actually finished that one clip, Emily, where she was like, talking about figuring out how the Nazis had to figure out who was Jewish. And she actually said they had to do the work. Oh my God. That's like one of those woke phrases used on Hitler. My head's going to explode. But so she dug herself in deeper there. And actually it was a perfect example of what we were just talking about, right? Like the race essentialism, if I can't see it, it must not be as you say.
Yeah, and Eliana explained it perfectly, and that's exactly what it is. And what Whoopi Goldberg sounds like to me is somebody who's grappling really poorly with this fringe academic theory that has been really popular in sort of radical circles, especially among radical activists for a very long time, that has sort of slowly crept into the mainstream. But Whoopi Goldberg has a very tenuous understanding of it and isn't able to express it, because when it is in the sort of light of day, it's really hard to actually defend. defend. It's one of those ideas that you can sort of defend in your own circles when everybody agrees with you, but then when you're confronted with challenges to it, it just absolutely punctures. But that's the benefit, and that's why you should never fire people who are in sort of situations like this, because these ideas fester unless they are out here in the light of day, and you can have somebody like Eliana come on a show like this and explain exactly why it's wrong, and why it's so obviously, like, clearly wrong, because otherwise these ideas just sort of circulate in areas where they aren't getting challenged, and people need to hear the debate on them.
Well, that's the one thing, like, whatever she sees with her eyes, there's no question that Hitler saw Jews as, quote, an inferior race. I mean, that's just knowing your basic history. So she was confused. She didn't understand it. I get it. And she keeps digging. And today what happened on the show was she went out there and said, and I quote, "Yesterday on our show, I misspoke." Okay. That's not what misspeaking is. Misspeaking is when I called Mike Huckabee Mike Fuckabee. That is misspeaking. One of my best moments on the air. She spoke intentionally and in her head correctly, but she was wrong. That's what she needs to say. Then she said, "I said the Holocaust wasn't about race and was instead about man's inhumanity to man. It is indeed about race because Hitler and the Nazis considered Jews to be the inferior race. Words matter, mine are no exception. I regret my comments. I stand corrected." And she had the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, this guy Jonathan Greenblatt, who's just been terrible. I mean, he's just been terrible. He's changed the ADL into something that used to be noble in its purpose to just this crazy woke organization that it doesn't know what it stands for. It just redefined the definition of racism this week to something absolutely insane. But it's consistent with the woke ideology of basically any system that discriminates is racist. Anyway, he was there, and now he's calling for The View to add a Jewish co-host, right? You need representation to solve problems like this. What do you make of that, Eliana?
Well, I will answer your question, but I just wanted to say, I mean, this goes to show we now do this ritualistic apologizing when we make mistakes or are asked to. And the Whoopi thing shows how absurd that is, where she issues this apology on Twitter and then goes on Colbert and doubles down essentially on her original comments. And it just shows what a complete sham these apologies are. But, Megyn, remind me your question. I've now got
about this ADL guy, Jonathan Greenblatt.
Oh, the ADL. I totally agree with you. We need to point out that Jonathan Greenblatt, as head of the ADL, has teamed up with Al Sharpton, one of the most notorious anti-Semites now laundered into the mainstream, to go after Facebook. And has embraced, the ADL put out a statement, I think it was just last week, about a scholarship for Jews of color, embracing the idea that there's a difference between Jews with more melanin and Jews with lesser melanin, which is what Whoopi Goldberg is talking about and how she stepped in it.
Wow. Well, it's probably no accident she booked him. So now back to the cattiness within the walls at ABC. I mean, this is like, I'm reading the story and partly I'm like, trigger. This is like, I remember what it's like to have the nameless, faceless staffers speaking out to places like the Daily Mail, like, she should be fired. Why hasn't the company said or done more? And, there's always a platform for these people to sort of try to stick the knife in when somebody who's as rich as Whoopi is, successful as she is, stumbles, as opposed to saying, teachable moment, she screwed up, she's owning it, let's move on. I mean, I realize it's because of the way her mind is built and all the things that we've just been talking about in terms of the way, her wokeism. But fine, that actually is totally consistent with the staffers at ABC and the way they see the world. We go right away, Emily, to fire.
Well, yeah, and The View is sort of, people have literally written books about this, but The View is one of those atmospheres where leaks are sometimes worse than at other times, and it's sort of many seasons, but True. It's one of the worst places because there is this cattiness behind the scenes that doesn't exactly disabuse people of the stereotypes about women that they may hold.
I was going to say, Emily, you're just playing into some noxious gender stereotypes here.
Yes. Yes, you're right. We need Whoopi Goldberg to come on here and explain sort of feminist theory to us so that we can speak with more moral clarity.
Who wouldn't watch that?
But no, I mean, The View is like one of the worst places for this, and it's just actually just sort of baked into the way The View is run. It's a huge part of it is run via media leaks. This is how they actually litigate their workplace problems, and so to me it just speaks to a lack of leadership at the show. That people, one way to stop people from leaking is to make them not want to leak. The Trump White House, in fact, suffered with this problem, and so when you have those issues, I think that they actually really the View is pretty desperate for a shakeup, and I think that is imminent because this is just not sustainable.